good morning or afternoon, whatever the case may be. Welcome back to our conversations. Welcome Babe Baltus, who was here with us last week, and Sister Janet Marie Peterworth, who was here 2 weeks ago, and Virginia Schaefer, this is the first time. So welcome, Jenny. Today we're going to talk about, basically, Angela's spirituality. And in the book, it covers chapters 3, 4, 5, and 6. Now, I may not get all of that accomplished in this hour, and so what I don't get accomplished, we'll do the next time. So here we go. Spirituality is actually very important for all of us, and I've talked to many groups where people will say, I don't have any spirituality, which of course is not. Well, it depends on what you call spirituality. I'm not sure how an accurate definition of it, but there's a description that I like to use that I learned a long time ago from a very wise sister of Notre Dame. And we learned that spirituality has to do with the way we stand in reality. Without judgment, just how do I stand in reality? Face to face to myself and to God and to other people and to creation. So that's my spirituality. And it's neither good, bad, or indifferent. It just is. So I could never say to anybody, mine's better than yours, yours is better than mine. It's just what is. And when I think about my stance toward myself and God, others, and creation, I may decide, well, I don't treat creation the way I really want to, then I change it. So if I don't care for the way I treat other people, then I change that. I may have to work on that my whole life. But it's something that's moving, and it's always, what do I want? What do I want to be as I stand in reality? I went to yoga this morning, and the most interesting thing happened because the teacher used a word I've never heard before, and I could never repeat it, but it has to do how you stand in reality. And I thought, well, isn't that interesting? I would call that spirituality, but that is not what she called it. It has to do with your body person. So always be aware of your feet, she said. Okay, we're gonna start with Angela's images and her spirituality. And I've always tried to use her rule because the rule gives us her words about herself and God and others. She doesn't talk much about creation, but that may have to do with the time she lived in the 16th century. Okay, so I searched her rule to see what she said about God. And, I say to people, who do you think God is? That's a very important question. I have to admit that I often ask that question when I hear preachers. I think, who do you think God is that you're talking like this? Or, do you know the same God I know? Anyway, that's a logical question. So I asked Angela, okay, who did you think God is? Well, I went through her writings, and I found that, like most of us, she had more than one name she gave God. And so she called God His Majesty, His Divine Majesty. But the most intimate of her titles for God was Lover. Now, that's a far distance, it seems like, from Divine Majesty to Lover. But she includes all of that in her conversation that I found names for that she gave to God. So those are two stances before God, one of awe and reverence, which I came before Divine Majesty. I'd be a little bit awed. But Lover is an altogether different stance, and it speaks of intimacy, tenderness, passion, all those things that we associate with love, being a lover. And so then this goes into the second question, like, who do you think other people are? Because when she calls God my lover, she always says, or rather, lover of us all. Now, that's an extension, so she recognizes that other people have that same relationship with God. God has that same relationship with them. So we're all called to that kind of deep intimacy as lover to lover. And that is something to think about. I used to think, I'll never think of God as my lover. I have images of God as Sacred Heart, which is, depending upon the art, it's a gentle, loving kind of image, or Good Shepherd. And I have seen pictures of Jesus preaching, but I had never thought I'd ever want to call God my lover. But you know what? I guess if you live long enough, at least for me anyway, if I lived long enough, I got there. And so now that's a very appealing title or stance before God, because that makes God very close and intimate. Passionate is the word. God was supposed to have said to one of the saints, I think it was Angela of Foligno, who was a friend of Angela Mérici's. God is supposed to have said to her, Angela, my love for you is no joke, which means, I mean this. This is not just fluffy stuff. I love you. So apparently Angela had that experience of knowing God's passionate, loving, gentleness, fidelity, all those things that we associate with love.
But Martha, one of the things that I struggle with, I recognize that Jesus is the reflection of God, but the separation that I grew up with anyway was God appear as Father. I could see God as divine majesty. I don't think of Jesus as Father, and I don't think of Jesus as divine majesty. I think of Jesus more as a shepherd and that kind of thing. So maybe it's my compartmentalization of the Trinity, but can you speak to that a little bit in terms of it's easier to see Jesus as a lover, in fact, a spouse of Christ. They sang that to us many long years ago, and that's really what sort of the ecology, theology was of that notion. So anyway, can you say something about that?
Well, yes, because Jesus says himself, as the Father has loved me, so I love you. And then he says to his disciples, ask your Father, he loves you. He loves you. So in the unity of the Trinity, Jesus opens a whole new way of seeing God as Father, as loving, as intimate, wanting a relationship with us. And Jesus made that visible, but it was always there. When I first learned that creation, the Big Bang, was the first incarnation, that makes everything really look different. To know that when Jesus was born, that was the second incarnation. But creation was the first. And so many worship ceremonies handed on to us by our native fathers and mothers include creation and include God as Father, as Mother, as Nurturer, all of that. So I think many of I don't like to call them primitive, early, prehistory folks knew a whole lot more about God than we do. And sometimes we kind of push that aside without examining what the people were saying about God.
Do you think Angela had any kind of an idea of God as mother, like Julian of Norwich spoke often of God as mother? I don't see any evidence of that.
No, but I don't know that she didn't feel that way. She had a loving relationship with her own mother, and then she had a lot of lady friends, women friends, and then she was close to the earth because she was a farmer. So she was aware of the seasons and of the fruitfulness, plantings, so on. So in her day, those words were not used, so far as I know, anywhere, except, no, that's Mary. See, and then Mary enters this whole thing. I came to realize the medieval Christian artists never portrayed a woman's body except in Mary, because she was the one, the nurturing one. There's one picture I saw where there's a picture of Mary holding her breast out and the milk is coming out and she's feeding us as a mother. Well, it doesn't take much of an imagination to see we were looking for a female representation of God, and Mary filled that. Not believing that Mary was God, but she was somebody special who showed us God's love in a female way as a mother. So, yeah, I think there's a lot of conversation about that now that maybe was shunned before. But then there was Julian of Norwich, as you say, and that's the beautiful things that she said about Jesus, my mother. So, gives us something to think about. Maybe it is more comforting to us to embrace God as mother, as female, because God is female as much as God is male. Though coming out of a patriarchal world, I mean, you look at the Roman world, the women were just nothing, hardly a smidge above a slave. And as time has gone on, it has remained that way and intensified, and we have it today. We live in a patriarchal society. Sometimes I think we're right on the edge of breaking through that, and then people get their heads bumped on the glass ceiling. But we're moving in that direction, I like to think. Anyway, Angela never calls God or Jesus mother, but she also sees God as nurturing and as loving. So did she have a female image of God? Probably not consciously. At least she never told us that. Okay. But how we see God is so important. Keep asking yourself that with trying not to judge, because if somebody grew up with a strictly patriarchal image of God, that's how they're going to act and speak of God. And I can't judge that because I didn't have that kind of background. I always thought my mother was a good mother of God because she had an ample bosom. And all the statues of Mary I ever grew up with were marble and pretty hard and kind of neutered look, but not my mother. And when I came to the conclusion that the sisters really did not know everything, I would go to my mother's bosom and she would tell me that. The sisters don't know everything. Now, this is how God is. And as I get older, man, she was right on. At least that's how I have come to see God. But it's a good thing to ask yourself, really, who do you think God is? Not lip service. Oh, God is mother, father, sister, brother, all the rest of that. Yeah. But deep in my gut, how am I toward God? And I think that changes That's why I like to say to people, all things being equal, older is better. Because I can look back over a longer life and see how God was different, or how I saw God as different. But the different or the same, it's important to me as a person that I know how I see God. And so if I'm going to understand Angela and want to imitate her as a woman, especially, I need to know how she looked at God. Okay, that's that one. Okay, then there's self. How do I stand in relationship with self? Now, there's a connection among all of these naturally because the individual stands there in those relationships, and it's that same person who's in relationship to everything else. So how I see myself certainly affects the way I see myself. So I asked Angela, what did you think of yourself? Well, it's interesting because you can find all kinds of examples if you're looking for them. She speaks very highly of herself and with great confidence because she claims to be the mother of the company. She calls them my daughters, my sisters, and so, she had a pretty good self-image. And she says to them, I'll always be in your midst. I got it made. I'll be here for you always. Don't worry, I'm here. So that's pretty good self-image. Maybe we could see about our grandmothers. She's always with me. Well, so that grandmother probably had a pretty good self-image too. If she could say to her grandchildren, don't worry, Grammy's always here for you. So apparently she had a very positive self-image. She was independent. She did so many things in her life that ordinary women did not do. She was not educated, though she could read, and that opened a whole world to her. This is right about the time when the printing press was getting quite imposing upon reality. So her father used to read to them the lives of the saints and from the scripture. And when you read her readings, they're shot through with the feel of scripture. There's sometimes, and I think you could say that about the letter to the Ephesians. Sometimes it's like, who said that? Paul said that. Who said that? Angela said that. Well, I'll be. They both have that same, I know God, so I can tell you about God. So she has a strong, positive self-image. Okay. On the other hand, when you read her chapter on prayer, it's like, who is she talking about? Because she uses all those images that kind of go along, kind of go along with the times that we have read about, when I'm a worm and no man and that kind of thing. And it's like she saw herself as a dreadful sinner. She was sorry for her sins and the sins of her parents and her family. And so there's this, and another person, it would sound like a very negative self-image. So you got two of those. Here she is being being the mother and the one who will always be with us as leader. And on the other hand, you've got her seeing herself as a sinner. And so you think, okay, which one was she? Well, happily, she was both. Because I think the greatest gift, greatest grace that we can receive is knowing ourselves as loved sinners. Because I've heard this so often. If I see myself only as loved, then I'm going to be really surprised and disheartened when I find out there's a lot of unlovable stuff about myself. On the other hand, if I only see myself as a sinner, I'll grovel in the dirt all my life. I mean, that's pretty bad. Sometimes I look at politicians, and I say to myself, who do they think they are? Really? I don't mean it in that, who do you think you are? I don't mean in that tone of voice. But who do they think they are? And who do they think God is? That's it, really. But that could lead me to be very judgmental. But I say to Angela, did you know yourself just as a saint, as a holy foundress? Or did you see yourself just as a wretched sinner? Or did you know yourself as both? You know, Peter's a great example. One of the stories that I like to read about Peter was the first time he hadn't been following Jesus very long. And of course, he was a fisherman. And the guys had been working all night and they didn't catch anything. So he says to them, put your net, go out and cast your net on the other side. And like, okay, who's this guy? Who's he think he know about fishing? He was a carpenter, for heaven's sakes. But they didn't want to mess with the boss, you know. So they did what he said, and they caught so many fish. They had to get their buddies to come help them before their boat sank. I always find it surprises me every time I read that story, because Peter's first response is, go away from me. I'm a sinful man. I mean, I'm not sure if that's how would have been my response. But that's how he responded. And Jesus did not say to him, no, Peter, you're not a sinner. He said, follow me. Well, that kind of puts it all together. So I can follow Jesus. I can become a lover of God, whether I'm a sinner or not. In fact, the brighter light that shines on me, the darker the shadow comes. But both of those are me. The darkness and the light. Jesus says that to Peter more than once. You remember after the resurrection, Peter was repentant, of course, because he had denied Jesus, and Jesus kind of rubs his nose in it, asks him 3 times, do you love me? And Peter is beside himself. Yes, Lord, you know all things. You know I love you. Each time Jesus tells him to go into a ministry, feed my lambs, feed my sheep, feed my sheep. In other words, follow me. And that's the important thing, I guess, that puts those 2 things together. So Angela, in her coming to the reality of realizing that she also was a sinner, we can't point to any particular sins. Maybe she was proud. If she was, it doesn't express itself. But she knew herself as a sinner. And that was important. But she also knew herself as loved. Not in spite of her sins, maybe because of them. Who knows? So she knew that about herself. That she was loved and a sinner. And a loved and a sinner. All of that. Now, you might ask yourself, who do you think you are? Do you know yourself as a loved sinner? I don't know if you do or not, but you could ask yourself about that. And if you really cannot say that deep in your gut you know yourself as loved and sinner, pray for that grace, because that's like the basis of a whole lot of other things. It's the basis of my relationship with God. It certainly is the basis for my relationship with other people. Because as I face other people, as Angela did, I cannot judge them. I can't, if I know myself as a sinner. So in a way, sinners make the best lovers, because it's like, I already know I'm a sinner, but I also know I'm loved, so I could be a lover too. That's wonderful. I guess that's also humility, the truest kind of humility. Not that beats on myself and says, I'm a sinner, I'm a sinner, I'm a sinner, because there's this echo in my ear always, follow me, follow me, follow me. Feed my lambs, feed my sheep. You're a sinner? Feed my lambs, feed my sheep. So it does not, my sinfulness, all the great saints tell us this, my sinfulness does not keep me from God or God from me. Most of the time it's the path that God uses to come to me and that I use in reaching to God, because I know who I am as I go before God. And then, of course, that alters my vision of who God is, because God would have to be very, very big to love me as if I'm a sinner. And then say, I don't have to worry about loving because God loves me. Isn't that simple? You know, it's all about love. Loving, being loved, and being able to love. And the more I know myself as loved, the more I'm able to love. Then that opens up my relationship to other people. One time,
Sometimes it's something like a song that says, love, sweet love, that's all the world
what the world
need of
needs
or
now,
something.
yeah. What the world needs now is love, sweet love.
Yeah.
That's the truth. Yes. Well, so we need to look at that and ask for that grace, and that grace gets deepened. The more we come to know our weaknesses and sinfulness, and the more we're open to being loved by God. And then what that does is open us up to love other people. I look at a lot of people, and I guess it's judgmental, but what I think is they have never been loved. They've never known some flesh person to love me. And when many years ago when my sister used to, do, I don't know what, charitable works, whatever you want to call that. And she used to visit a home for children. And one time she went into a room, and most of the little children were playing and whatever, and there was one little boy who was in his crib. I don't know how old he really was. She thought he was like a year or two, because he was very tiny and he didn't respond to anybody. And so my sister said to the nurse, "What's wrong with the little boy? How old is he?" And the woman said, "He's 8. And she said, "Well, what's wrong with him?" And she said, "When we first found him, he was tied in his crib." That child grew up crippled from the very beginning, not knowing love or a mother's love or a father's care. He grew up with nothing, and that's all he had. I mean, that is heartbreaking. So how could that?
About animals too.
Yes, I know.
If you don't love them and care for them and domesticate them, then they
die. That's what
they
do.
die, but they also get mean.
Yes.
So they have to be socialized otherwise.
Yes. Don't we all?
Yeah. Really.
I look at some folks in our society, I think, what you need is a lover who loves you in spite of yourself. That would change you. So Angela had that gift of loving others. And she had that particular gift. She talks about having your daughters, each one, engraved on your heart. Each one. Because she says, that's how true love acts. There was a lady who used to call when I was in Pittsburgh. She'd call and say, "Would you pray for this or this? And don't lump me." Because we don't like to be lumped. All people who did.
Intentions.
Yes, don't lump me. So Angela did not lump her daughters. She knew each one in particular. And she talks about that in one of the chapters. We're more or less like formation directors. And she says to them, know your daughter so well that there are some who need encouragement. And so give them a special encouragement to help them along. And some, she says, are forward. That's an interesting word. I don't know that we use that word anymore. Smart mouth, maybe, or stubborn, or whatever. And she said, give them sternness. Treat them with call them to, this is the way you go. So she knew how to love, not lumping her daughters, but each one individually. That is hard to do, especially as the numbers of the company grew. She started out with 28 who were actually members of the company. Well, 28 you can know. But then there were the colonelli, who were the novice directors, if you want to say that, formation directors. Then there were their other ladies who were, I would have found them harder to love, but they were very important because they had more of a legal presence. And then there were the men, and they certainly they needed the men so they could make their way, the company could make its way. So, but she loved them, each one in particular. We've talked about how she loved Antonio Romano and Agostino Gallo. She was like part of their family. So there was that closeness. But I suspect she did not love Agostino Gallo the way she loved Antonio Romano. Not one more than the other, but different, because they were different people. So I can look at my relationships with people and say, how do I love them without judging? I mean, come on, some people you like more because they're more likable. And some people, you don't like so much. But that does not mean that there's not love there. Love that takes the form of care and concern and prayer and help, if the person is helpable, to come to love. I've told this story many times about Sister George Marie. When she turned 100, she said to me, "Martha, it's all about love." And I said, "That's nice. Yeah, it's all about love." Next year, when she turned 101, she said, "Dear, I don't remember your name, but it's all about love." So I've known for a long time that it's all about love. But I have to say, when I look at the world now, it's really all about love. That is so simple, but we don't. And part of that is that we don't love ourselves, and part of it is that we don't know God is love. So how are we going to do this? How are we going to make any progress? Well, we're going to be lovers because it's all about love. And if we really believe that, it makes life really simple. Like, what is the most loving thing I could do for anybody? I don't do that. Once in a while I do. But it's like, that's the goal, and that's the desire, is to love all. Not equally, all individually. I don't lump them. Most people don't lump very well because people are really different. But if my attitude toward them is one of love, I'll find something that's lovable. I remember Sister Vera told us, she used to be our supervising teacher, I guess you'd call her. And she used to tell us that for every child she ever met, she always looked for something that she really liked about the child. And she said there was this one little boy who was in our classroom, and she could not find anything to love about the kid. So she tried and tried and tried. Finally, she said, his shoes are always polished. So she said, I started with that. Because find something that you love about the person and let it grow from there. Okay, now we've talked about 3 parts of spirituality. Angela stands toward herself, toward God, and towards others. That's her spirituality. Now, if we know those 3 things, 3 movements or stances in ourselves, that's our spirituality. Now, it's neither good, bad, nor indifferent. It just is. And the freedom comes if you don't like one or the other, change it as far as you can do that. Now, the other one, Angela never talks about creation. And I don't know if it's because it was so in her face, as it were, because she lived close to the earth, and she certainly lived among all kinds of people, good ones and bad ones and rich ones and poor ones, all nationalities, because she traveled so much. So we don't know how she related, to the earth. She talks about the beauty of flowers. She talks about that a couple of times. And when I visited her place in the world, it's beautiful. You look around and you say, Angela never saw this house. She never saw this road. She didn't know anything about how those farmers are working the field. But all you have to do is look up and the Dolomites are there. She saw those mountains. They've been there since God threw them up, So there's something about the place where you are that affects you. I remember visiting Cumberland many years ago, and I don't know who the sister was. She was from a different community, but she taught art. And she said she found the children so much more sensitive to beauty. And she said, I think it's because it's such a beautiful place. They're in the middle of mountains too, and there are fruitful fields and trees and all that, but it's beautiful. It really is a beautiful place. She said, I think that has affected their perception of nature. So that's important to reflect about. How do I love creation? I just got back from a trip to Canada, and I saw the Canadian Rockies. I was overwhelmed. But one of the things that I also noticed was that the Canadians are a whole lot more respectful of nature than we are from the United States. I didn't see any plastic the whole time I was there. Cloth napkins. We went to a McDonald's, and darn if they didn't serve a frappe in a glass dish with a metal spoon that you didn't throw away. They had paper napkins. It was amazing. I was truly impressed with the respect that they have for creation, the respect they have for their wildlife. I didn't, they dug tunnels under the roads so the animals would go under the road and not go across the road and get killed. And then they built overpasses. And the newspapers laughed at them. They said, no creature's going to use that. Well, so they put cameras up. First one they got was a beaver, so it didn't count too much. They warned him. They really laughed about that one. But now, all the animals use it. They have pictures of bears and elk, rabbits. I don't know. I never saw a rabbit while I was there. Lots of squirrels. But all kinds of animals go across there. So that says to me, they really went to a lot of trouble and expense to take care of the wildlife. So, there is...
We're the only state that has a bridle path across to Expressway.
Where does?
We have a bridle path across 64. It's the only state in the Union that I know of that has a bridle path. Oh, yeah. They didn't want to change the route of the bridle path in Cherokee Park.
So they built an overpass?
Overpass on 64. Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
They always refer to that as a tunnel. Is that it?
No. No, it's
The bridle path is the
bridle path
overpass.
is an actual
Overpass.
overpass
Out of the park to the other side of the park.
across the park.
Well, now that gives me something to be pleased with. So we are attentive to our
Well, at least that creature. I don't know how many other creatures use it, but people who ride in the park use it.
Okay, so it kind of reshapes our whole way of looking at creation, and we pray that that gets deepened while we still have a beautiful creation, that we shepherd it, tend it. I saw a movie, I think it was just called The Birds. I don't know if that was the name of it, but it was about flying birds, not, well, all birds fly, but this talked about wild birds, and it was remarkable. I don't know what kind of airplane or something that they had that could fly along with the flock, and it was taking pictures of these birds, big birds, right up close, like you could see their faces. It was like, and they went all these different places, and they showed wild birds in cities, and in one place it was, I almost cried out loud. It showed these beautiful mallards stuck in the oil sludge. They were going to die. They were stuck. They couldn't get out. And of course, overhead was the belching towers of smoke and what have you. That really impressed me, because it showed me the danger that we are to creation. So, what's our stance? Most of us, I shouldn't say that, many of us don't care. So, leave the electricity on all night, so that you get a leak in your faucet, let it leak. Or, I don't care if I throw junk around, trash around, doesn't matter to me, somebody will pick it up. So it's something about that respect for creation that is very precious and is akin to how I treat other people and what I think of myself, you know? And then, how do I see God in relationship to that? If I really believe that God made creation, then it's a handmaid of God as much as I am. And that's very sobering. God made that first. And I just got maybe added as an afterthought. That's not true. But creation was not made for my pleasure to do with it as I please. Although we really do have that, some of us really have that attitude, that it's for me to use. I always think the next generation, children, will be our salvation along there, because so many children have a much better stance toward taking care of the earth. And that's a good thing, because we hope they have it, that we're not going to do something to it to make it unlivable. Okay, so there's Angela's spirituality. How she was toward God, how she was toward herself, towards other people, toward creation. Now, I don't have to have the same spirituality she had, but I need to be aware, that's the big word, aware, conscious of my own spirituality. Otherwise, I kind of go through life, just plodding along, not paying attention to anything. Jesus talked a lot about loving your neighbor, but he also talked a lot about paying attention. I think he talked about that more than telling you to love your neighbor. He said, pay attention. What's going on? He said to his disciples, this always hurts me. Have I been with you such a long time and you don't know who I am? That's really sad. That I could have been with a loving, faithful community, and I still haven't got it. Or I can have this wonderful human body that I have, and I'm still not aware of its relationship with all the rest of the human bodies. So that's kind of what I wanted to tell you today. There's more about our spirituality that we will talk about, and that includes our ministry and discernment, which is really very, very important, but we'll leave that for another time. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Martha.